All right, so for those who don't know me, I'm Joshua Cohen. I'm the Community Director at Partners for Climate Action Hudson Valley, where we support ecological leadership by deploying capital in its many forms to help catalyze bioregional climate action. Our team works closely with municipalities and members of volunteer committees and councils like climate smart community task forces and conservation advisory councils from across this region. So we're particularly excited about this session today and this topic. So this morning coffee session is entitled, Put It in Writing, How Local Governments Can Plan for Climate Change. And if you haven't been part of one of these monthly webinars before, they're part of a series intended as learning opportunities for our local climate community. We're really glad that you could join us today for what appears to be one of our most popular ones yet. I think this is the most RSVPs we've had for one of our webinars. So thanks for joining. My colleague, Paige Ruane, will be facilitating today's session. She's going to introduce our two great speakers, followed by a moderated Q&A, and then an audience Q&A. I encourage you to hold your questions until after the presentations, and then we'll try to address them during that portion of the webinar. At that time, please feel free to raise your actual hand or your virtual hand, or you can type a question directly into the chat as well. So, and then we'll try to wrap up around 9:30. So I mentioned this earlier, but I ask you if you wouldn't mind trying to keep yourself on mute as well while the speakers are presenting. All right. So welcome again, everyone, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Paige.
Thanks, Joshua. Welcome everyone to this morning coffee session. I'm Paige Ruane. I'm a co-founder of Partners for Climate Action and a co-director of our recently launched Building Decarbonization Grant. I am especially excited for this hour because I serve on my own town's Climate Smart Communities Task Force in Austerlitz, where we are currently engaged in a comprehensive planning process. And in full transparency, as my fellow task force members and I tried to wrap our minds around how to best assist our town with this process, we weren't quite sure where to start. So we reached out to other towns who had been through the process and also attended a workshop given by the Hudson River Estuary program. We'll hear from them today. This work opened my eyes to the resources that exist, which empower municipalities to use planning to advance their goals around addressing climate change. So planning suddenly became sexy to me. I'm sure many of you have already gone down this road, and I look forward to hearing about your experiences and sharing knowledge. But what I learned as I dove into this topic is that planning can be overlooked as a powerful tool to address the climate crisis and the pressure to develop land. People may not be aware of the planning tools we'll discuss today or assume that if plans are created, they will sit on a shelf. However, we'll hear from two local experts about how concerned citizens and the municipal officials can use various forms of planning to support their conservation goals and their climate goals. The planning processes and resulting documents we'll discuss today can be used to identify valuable natural assets a village, town, or city already has, and therefore allow them to make informed decisions about how to protect them and avoid the costs of urban and suburban sprawl. Natural assets such as wetlands, forests, and meadows act as buffers to flooding and heat. Municipal officials and residents may or may not know about the services done for them by certain natural features in their midst. And if they are aware, they may not have a process in place for protecting them or know where to start to create one. The logic behind permitting processes may be obscure to residents, even if they're available for public reference. However, whatever logic is in place affects them and the community they care about. When permission is given for a development to go ahead, there can be loss of the land's ability to sequester carbon, loss of biodiversity, critical to our food web, and loss of natural features that regulate temperature. A lot of policy development and work go into helping a municipality become thoughtful about the choices they make on a regular basis about land use. Municipalities have the authority to go farther than state law to regulate how close a house can be built to a wetland, for instance. the most crucial decisions about land use are really made and carried out locally. But what is involved, and how can it be done with forethought about the safety of residents, resilience to climate change, and wise economic stewardship? And how can those who care participate? So to answer these questions, we'll be hearing from our two guests. Partners for Climate Action is grateful to Christine Vanderlan and Colleen Lutz for joining us today. Christine will present first. She is a conservation and land use specialist with the Hudson River Estuary program through a partnership with Cornell University. Christine joined the Estuary program following 8 years with the Columbia Land Conservancy, where she led the Community Planning and Engagement Program. Her policy experience also includes state and federal climate and renewable energy policy. Christine earned a Master's of Science in Biodiversity, Conservation, and Policy from the University of Albany. Christine, thank you so much for being here with us today. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen to bring my slides up. Try to get them into slideshow mode. Challenge is the taskbar for Zoom is right in front of where I need to click to get into slideshow mode. So, all right, it's going away now. From the beginning. Okay. So good morning. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here today with all of you and with Colleen to share, an introduction really to how to get started with planning for climate change. And the focus is really on the land use and climate connection. There are many different ways that municipalities can and need to be planning for climate change, say in the infrastructure that they own. Shoreline community may find a wastewater treatment plant is in an area that's now vulnerable to flooding due to sea level rise along the Hudson River. That kind of infrastructure planning, asset planning is a separate level of planning for climate change. And our focus today is on the land use regulation that municipalities are in charge of locally and the connections there with planning for climate change. So I'm going to give a little background about the program that I work for and how we partner with municipalities before talking about kind of local land use regulatory authority, the connection with climate change, and some of the key tools available to municipalities who are seeking to plan and integrate climate resiliency and minimizing climate impacts for their communities at the same time. This is really going to be kind of introductory, and there's a lot more information and resources available out there than I can touch on in this short time. So just please know that you can reach out to me following this event. And I know the organizers are also going to be sharing a list of resources as well for participants after the webinar. The Hudson River Estuary Program is a non-regulatory part of the Department of Environmental Conservation. And we work throughout that green shaded area on the map of New York State to the right of your screen. We work in what's called the estuary watershed. So the portion of the Hudson River that's under the influence of the tides is the estuary portion of the river, and all of the lands that drain to streams that then drain to the Hudson River to that tidal portion, that's all the estuary watershed. And it's almost all of 10 counties bordering the Hudson River. We work to achieve an array of benefits listed here, and there's a number of different teams working on all of these different kinds of benefits and programs. our work is guided by a 5-year action agenda, and that's something that you can access and learn more about online too. This estuary corridor is an extraordinarily rich place biologically. It's shaded in blue on this map, and thinking about all of New York State and all of the animal species that are found here, we have a really high level of those species found in this particular region, even though we're not such a massive part of New York State. So we have a real opportunity to conserve and help support this biological diversity over time. And that really is one of the motivating factors for our team, the conservation and land use team, to exist within the estuary program, recognizing that local land use decisions are really key to the future of the habitats that support those species. The conservation and land use program was created to work with and assist municipalities in their local land use planning functions and help connect them with data and techniques and strategies. We offer guidance publications, and we have a great clearinghouse online, the conservation planning in the Hudson River Estuary Watershed website. So while I can only touch on some strategies today, there's a whole wealth of information out there, and I encourage you to explore that after today's webinar. So thinking about the local land use regulatory framework in New York State, we have a home rule approach. So local land use authority is, with very few exceptions, positioned at the local level. So in the Hudson River Estuary corridor, we have 251 different municipalities, cities, towns, villages, and they all exercise local land use authority. So determining the types of development, the types of land uses, the pace of that development, its shape on the landscape, the authority to guide and direct that is residing at the local level. Thinking about the connection between local land use and climate change. So our resiliency to climate change in our communities, our human communities, resilience to climate change is going to be influenced by the quality of our natural lands and their extent in our communities. These natural lands like forests, wetlands, floodplains, they are providing ecosystem services that help support our resiliency. And thinking about just one climate change impact for a region that is going to be experienced across all of the Hudson River watershed, the more of our precipitation falling in extreme or intense rainfall events, we're going to feel that. We've already been feeling that with flooding impacts. And just thinking about the role of wetlands in storing and then slowly releasing water, they're playing a key role to enhance our resilience to this kind of climate impact. And that's just one example. So we're going to take a minute to think about land use choices, which are shaped by the local framework that's set up, your local laws around zoning and subdivisions and site plan review all shape what development looks like on the landscape. So we're going to think about this particular parcel and the existing conditions on it ahead of a proposed development. The dark green is forest, light green is farmland, yellow is more developed kind of lawn, garden, daily use kind of land for whoever's living in the gray structures here. There's on this map between these dotted black lines, this riparian corridor. So those are the lands that most directly influence the quality of that stream flowing through there and its conditions. So if we think about a potential development on this site. They could have a proposal that looks like the one on the left, scenario A, or scenario B. And so if you take a minute, oops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Take a minute to think about the potential implications of each scenario for climate resilience, thinking about that extreme rainfall scenario I was talking about, thinking about carbon storage and loss. And I know folks on this call probably have certain climate impacts that are top of mind for you. If you want to put in the chat, what you observe between A and B in terms of the potential implications for these things. And thinking about the natural systems and what scenario, maybe supporting natural systems and their continued function into the future. While I'm sharing my screen, I'm not actually seeing, okay, let me see if I can see the chat, if anybody's tossing anything in there.
There was one question, Christine, about which 2 municipalities you don't provide services for, or the Hudson River Estuary program doesn't provide services for, just as a clarifying question.
Which 2 municipalities?
Yeah, or maybe, yeah, that was a question from Eva, and perhaps there was a misunderstanding. If that's not the case, then we can proceed.
Okay.
May I just quickly, what are the municipalities that you provide services for? You said almost all of the 10 municipalities. I'm just trying to understand which ones you don't provide.
Oh, almost all of the 10 counties.
Counties,
that border
I'm
the
sorry.
Hudson River. Yeah, there's the boundary of the estuary watershed kind of cuts in from the state line to, a little bit over in the eastern edge with Massachusetts. So some of those communities are not in the estuary watershed, but it's very few.
It's Columbia County in.
A little part of Columbia, a little part of Dutchess. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So there's a couple observations in the chat about difference in the amount of farmland that's developed, the distance of structures from the water resource, the stream there, and allowing movement of wildlife through the land. The more condensed plan allows that. So these stream side areas, riparian corridors, really are important corridors for wildlife movement in the landscape. So that's true. And someone else was pointing out the proximity to the stream of some of these sites in scenario A. So just thinking about these kinds of impacts and implications as a thought exercise to make the connection between local land use decisions, which do shape the form that development can take in communities, and the implications for climate change. If we were giving out a gold star for being kind of more climate informed, we'd give that to the scenario on the right. So what are the tools and methods that municipalities have at their disposal to guide and shape land use? Basically, we've got, you can think of them in these 3 buckets: plans, policies, and then practices. And plans are documents that really gather a lot of data and information. They can be built around public engagement processes to help determine the priorities of a community and a vision for where it wants to go in the future. The comprehensive plan is a key planning tool that most communities have in some form. But there's many other kinds of plans. You can plan for a particular area, like a hamlet. You can plan for a particular waterfront area. And you can also have plans around specific resources, like a watershed or a lake management plan. Policies are, the actual encoded in law elements of your local code that guide land use planning. And those include the zoning code, subdivision laws, site plan review processes. And you can have specific kinds of local policies that really create resource protection. Those might be critical environmental areas where you might have overlay zones with a conservation focus. And these other basic tools, subdivision laws, site plan review, can have integrated within them resource considerations as well. And practices are the less formal kinds of ways that, say, the planning board goes about doing its job, where they may invite applicants in for a pre-application meeting to really early on talk about and look at natural features on a site. That might not be encoded in their policies and their local law, but it's a practice that they're using. And there's other practices like that. Thinking of the theme and title of this session, Put It in Writing, just sort of a plug to, if these informal processes are being used, but they're not really formalized and encoded, they can fall to the wayside over time. So putting these things in writing, really making them your town policy, is going to help ensure they continue into the future. Basic tool that can be integrated into local land use planning at any scale are some basic conservation principles. And there's a short set here. We have conservation principles of this nature and similar ones in some of the documents and guidance that are provided by our program. I see a lot of municipal comprehensive plans adopt language around this kind of conservation principle, and getting these into your plans is a really important step in integrating climate change, integrating natural systems into your local land use planning. When I say this can be integrated at any scale, you can think about these kinds of principles and seek to implement them, looking at a particular parcel or looking at your whole community. A key tool that is fundamental to planning for natural systems, planning for the lands and natural areas that support climate resilience in your community, is a natural resources inventory. And natural resources are usually documented in comprehensive plans in some form, but a real standalone document can go into much greater depth than a typical comprehensive plan tends to go, in terms of pulling together information about this whole array of resources and their quality and their value for your community. And then a standalone natural resources inventory can be a reference for your decision makers on your planning boards, your zoning boards, to refer to as they're looking at development applications in the community. So we provide some assistance and resources to communities in creating natural resource inventories, and would be happy to talk with folks who are interested in that at any time. I mentioned the comprehensive plan, and just to kind of identify how important it is to the local land use regulatory structure in communities. The comprehensive plan is something that communities do voluntarily. State enabling legislation for creating comprehensive plans and for zoning, in particular for zoning, says that your zoning needs to be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan sets out the template, the vision for how you want your community to develop, what resources are important to you, and is a key guiding document for officials who are carrying out the policies of your community. Another, in my last few minutes, key kind of plan that I wanted to touch on, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to examine climate resilience in this form of planning is open space planning. And open space, lands that are not already intensively developed, spaces like your farmlands, shoreline areas, forests, parks, trails, looking at these kinds of lands and the value for your community, and then planning for their conservation really ties in with planning for resiliency for climate change in the future, as well as, I know some folks think a lot about kind of the stock of carbon that is embodied in trees, carbon that is in the soils, undisturbed soils in our communities. And there's a lot of potential for looking at those things in looking at your open space as well. So open space plans get very detailed into thinking, and this is just a little example from one plan, mapping open space resources in your community, thinking about the different values that they're contributing. So these are color-coded spaces based on what the resource value is of the open space, and describing those values and really looking at what are the individual parcels that are part of that open space. And open space planning then sets up the community to, as development proposals come in, examine their implications for these open spaces that they have put in their open space plan or on their open space index. So that's like a minute and a half on open space planning, and certainly can go much more in depth. And there's resources on our website about this and some example plans as well. Just to talk about, so who does all of this work, and that there's different roles and different entities within the local government that undertake these things. The key thing to kind of acknowledge and understand if you're getting involved locally in this local land use realm is that your city, town, or village board are the ones who are, that's your legislative body. They're the ones who are going to adopt and pass new plans and amendments to plans. They can adopt the natural resources inventory. They delegate, a lot of times they delegate work to committees who actually do a lot of the development of these plans and gather the information and oversee these kinds of projects. But it's the city, town, or village board that can shape and adopt new policy. And then the planning board and zoning board, they're the ones who are carrying out and implementing the existing land use policy that is on the books in your community. And to really highlight conservation advisory councils, conservation boards, and climate smart task forces, which I'll show on the next slide. Those folks really get charged with undertaking, looking out for the natural world and thinking about climate change. So in some communities, you might have both climate smart task forces and conservation advisory councils. Some communities may choose to have conservation advisory councils do the work and be the climate smart task force. Just to kind of put a plug for great communication and collaboration amongst these bodies. There's great opportunities there. And then also, while your CAC, Conservation Board, or Climate Smart Task Force, get charged with your climate adaptation work and your resource conservation work, having great communication and liaisons with your city, town, or village council is really important. Thinking back to, they're the folks who adopt plans and create new policies. So you want to have a champion or superhero on those boards if you can too, which is my little icon here. And I'd like to, Colleen hasn't been formally introduced, but she'll make a lot of this much more concrete through her experience. And so I'm going to just kind of wrap it up there and encourage folks to reach out, for more information following this, for sure.
Christine, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christine, for that overview. That was just really, really helpful. Now we'll hear from Colleen Lutz, who is a member of Ancram's New York's Climate Smart Communities Task Force. She represents Ancram on the Columbia County Environmental Management Council and is an assistant biologist to the New York Natural Heritage Program. She works as a special project assistant for the IMAP invasives team and as a research support specialist for the zoology program. She holds a BA in environmental science from Marist College and is currently pursuing a master's degree in biodiversity and conservation biology from the University of Albany. So Colleen, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk. It's funny because when you're in the throes of trying to wrangle all of this information together, you don't necessarily think that sometimes it can be a little bit daunting. So it's nice to actually share information and share experiences with everyone so that, we can help kind of collaborate our shared and joined experience. Oops, I just heard someone talking. So is there a question?
I think if folks could keep themselves on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. All right. So yes, all of those things. I do all of those things. I'm also on our CAC as well in the town. So I'm kind of what Christine just showed, that intermediate between the two, the Conservation Advisory Council and the Climate Smart Task Force. So I work with both of them. So I'm kind of that person as well. So I'm going to share my screen. I have just a few slides kind of documenting and tracking our process through comprehensive planning and zoning and some of the different additional plans that we've done to try to incorporate, conservation and climate planning into our community. And I'll give some examples of how we did things, and hopefully it will be helpful to others that are going through the same process. Okay. Awesome. All right. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what or where Ancram is, we're a very small town in the southeastern end of Columbia County. We actually have two different major watersheds in our town. We're primarily the Hudson River watershed, but we also have a little bit of the 10-mile river watershed in our municipality. We have a very small population. I looked at the most recent demographic information. We have a little over 1,000 residents that are in our community, and over time we've kind of shifted to I want to say primarily a second homeowner type of community. So out of that population, not all of them are full-time residents. And I'm hoping that this slide isn't too much, but on the left side, I went through and kind of looked at what kind of planning documents we have. And then I actually looked at, what our zoning laws are, or our regulatory updates have been. So we have a comprehensive plan. We've gone through and also done a natural resources conservation plan. And we also have an agricultural and farmland protection plan as well. We have two things that we have in process at the same time, which has been a little bit interesting to be able to kind of navigate both of these at the same time. But we're also working on one of our sub-watersheds. We're doing a characterization. So that kind of will feed into a greater watershed management plan in the future, and hopefully the near future. And we're also going through the climate adaptation and resiliency planning, which Columbia County is actually doing, and they opened it up to allow municipalities to also apply, and so that we can kind of tweak that county plan a little bit more to fit our needs. We also have zoning, and I kind of took that for granted when I moved into the community, and found out fairly quickly that one of the municipalities south of us had no zoning, and this was in the late 90s. So we've had zoning since 1972. And we also have subdivision laws which complement our zoning as well. So I'll go on, and I created a very busy little timeline to give you kind of a perspective of how long it takes to implement, develop and implement some of these plans through time, because that's going to be a key critical point that I'll make, especially if you're using volunteers to do a lot of your planning, that there is this time component that is involved in that. One thing that struck me when I finally laid this out is that we developed a pretty strong zoning law and comprehensive plan in 1972 and followed it up quite a bit later with a subdivision law. But it was amazing to me that it was 38 years that we had that comprehensive plan and zoning law in effect, and it didn't just sit there. We used the zoning law, and our comprehensive plan was referred to, but it wasn't updated for 38 years. And so it was shocking to me that when we found and we started to do the new updated plan, or the I'll call it the first updated plan, a lot of the key things were still relevant in what we wanted our community to look like. So I guess they did a really good job in 1972 when they created that, and they created the zoning. So the next chunk, it's amazing to me to see what we did in 14 years. We've actually had a brand new comprehensive plan and an update to that comprehensive plan. So I guess the guideline is roughly every 10 years, you should probably go back and take a look and make sure that the elements in your plan are still relevant to your community. But you also have to factor into that there's a lot of planning and community engagement when you're developing that. So in reality, for you to update a plan, you're going to need like 2 to 3 years prior to the actual enactment of that plan to actually go through and determine what's relevant in your community. So I don't want to get too far into the nitty-gritty about this. It's just kind of looking at and documenting how much we've actually accomplished in 14 years in our really tiny town, and we are thankful and very lucky to have so many great volunteers that actually have facilitated this. Let me move on. Okay, so one of the biggest things is being consistent across your plans and your laws. Your comprehensive plan is really your foundation, and it's really broadly setting out the goals of what your community is and what you expect it to be in whatever time frame that you use. I think ours was 2030 was kind of our time frame for the original plan. Our second or updated comprehensive plan, which we just passed in 2019, kind of bumped that out to 2050. And really that's community goals and vision. And that takes not only a lot of input from current boards, committees, but a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement, which is really community outreach. A lot of it is involving your community early in the planning process and going ahead and finding out what's really important to them. And then once you have a strong representative comprehensive plan, which just sounds awful, but I mean, it sounds like a hard thing to do, but once you have that, then you can go ahead and that plan can kind of guide you into what types of committees you're going to form and what kind of, subplans that you might want to have in your community based on what's important to it. So in our case, in Ancram's case, we have always been an agricultural community. So the first plan that we actually adopted was the Ag and Farmland Protection Plan. So that was something that was extremely important and very high on, our community's it was really a priority of our community. So that was really the first open space plan that we actually did. And then after that, shortly after that, within 4 years, we had completed the natural resources conservation plan, because that was also really important, was protecting the environment in our comprehensive plan. And then we get to the action, and so that we keep our plans relevant and we don't just let our plans sit there, we actually have created zoning that is consistent with our comprehensive plan and also takes into account some of the information that we've gained while creating our ag protection law or protection plan and our natural resources inventory plan. So I actually moved, if you move over to the right of the slide, I kind of decided to throw an example out there from some real text that is actually in the plans and in our zoning law. And I know it's kind of small because they're kind of large pieces here, but I highlighted out of our most recent comprehensive plan that Ancram is sustainable and resilient. But if you look right above that, we're developing policies and programs to protect all of these natural features: groundwater, watersheds, streams, woodlands, ridge lines, all of that. But we've also incorporated a little bit more sustainability into our newest plan. That was not there in the 2010 plan. So we just kind of went back and kind of added a little bit of that planning for climate resilience. And then if you take a step up and you look at our natural resource conservation plan, again, there's talking about, incorporating our environmental concerns into the planning process. So there's kind of that step forward that this has to be a resource when you're going to go ahead and review development sites, site plan, anything that has to do with actual development. And then if you go ahead and you bump up to the top, here's an actual excerpt right out of our zoning law: protection of springs and seeps, and that they need to be mapped on a site plan, and they need to be protected. And the reason why I used this example is because I actually have a real world example of something that just recently happened for a subdivision that we have in the town. It was a larger parcel. It was previously an agricultural parcel. They're retaining a portion that they're going to keep in agriculture, but they took and they were subdividing off 3 separate parcels, which they will eventually sell. And it's on like a prime view shed, prime area of forest, and where the actual 3 building sites are. And we went through we do site visits while we're looking at their proposed plan. And we got to the actual public hearing process, and the previous owner was actually in the audience, and he brought old aerial photos, really old aerial photos, and he said, there's a spring here, there's a spring there, and there's also, you know, these seeps in this location. I don't see that on this map. And so we said, okay, okay, this is really good knowledge. And in fact, the engineer was like, wow, okay, I didn't see those when I was out there. He was also the surveyor too. He said, I didn't see those. So we said, okay, we're going to go back out and we're going to try and locate those springs and seeps, because the important takeaway from this is when they actually showed where the proposed driveways were, one of them went right through one of the springs. So we went back out, spent about 3 hours on site traipsing through these fairly large parcels, and actually we were able to locate all of the water features that person of the public or previous owner had showed us. And it actually turns out that they were going to have to move that driveway to be able to protect that spring and that seep that's there. So it does work, you know, these laws that we have, and engaging the community, it works. It together. So I just threw up here a few things, just tips for climate and conservation planning. A stakeholder awareness and public engagement. I can't stress enough how important that is, and using a lot of institutional knowledge, or people that have been there for a long time. They know a lot about the land, and they can help you really identify things. And it also, in the converse of that, or it also gives you time to be able to help educate them about the importance of the resources that are in the town. Outreach is really important, and find every single way that you can reach out to people. We have a really good email system in our town. It was actually set up when the current town supervisor started, and it really has been helpful as far as getting information out to people. And so on a committee, if we produced something about solar energy, he can distribute it to this email list, which has, I forget how many actual subscribers, but the word gets out there. I would say probably one of Ancram's least strong outreach methods is social media. We don't do a lot of that, and perhaps we should, because I think that would engage younger people that are moving into the town, that are more likely to use social media. So I think we need to work on that a little bit more. And some of our biggest sources of information is reaching out to other local towns and other committees that are doing the work with you. I think it's really important to reach out to them. I would say that my experience on the Environmental Management Council has really helped that, because we all sit in a room and we talk about different things that our towns are doing, and you get good information and good feedback from that. we also use the Regional Planning Commission. In our case, it's the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, and they are extremely knowledgeable and helpful to us. And Cornell has been helpful for some of our planning documents, especially with the climate resiliency. And the DEC Climate Smart program has been very, very helpful. And the one I didn't list here because I wanted to give a special plug has been the Estuary program. They have been a partner with us from the beginning. They have number one, just financial support to do a lot of the plans. A lot of them are facilitated using grant money that we have earned or applied for, either directly through the Estuary program or for other entities that have already secured funding and they want to work with us. So, and that's some of our newest work, like our characterization plans of some of the watersheds. The baseline or the underlying funding comes from the Estuary program. So I really can't stress enough that it is extremely important to, if you live within the estuary, to really reach out to them and work with them, because they really can help assist you in getting a lot of this work done. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. That it was really wonderful to hear you and understand how the rubber hits the road, so to speak, about how we incorporate this into our democratic processes. So I think I'll ask just one question. You've already, both of you, answered so many of the questions I was going to ask you in the moderated Q&A. And so I, just would love to hear what drives both of you. And then I'll open it up to our participants in their Q&A. But I would love to, this foundational question, what sparked your passion for approaching conservation and climate issues the ways that you do? And was there a moment or experience where a person helped you realize that planning was a powerful tool to achieve your goals? Let's start with you, Christine.
So I began my career out of college working more at the federal and state level on environmental policy. And the organization I worked for was a think tank in Washington, D.C., where we were, thinking about big policy changes to address emissions of greenhouse gases, amongst other environmental challenges. And it was at that point in time in particular, climate change was not part of, the dialogue nationally or in communities. And so I really gravitated toward working in a way where I get to work with people who are directly affected by the policies to address climate change. And the local context there is, there's such an opportunity to address climate change locally, with the people who are, living in the communities and making these decisions. So that's kind of where some of my passion for this work comes from.
Thank you. Colleen, what about you?
First, I was going to say what drives me. I was going to say coffee, but then I held back and said, no, I'm not going to say coffee, but true story. What drives me? So when I first started out of college, out of my undergraduate work, I actually worked right on the Hudson River. And at the time we were coming out of, it was really taboo even to swim in the river at that time. It was much better than it was, in the early 70s. However, I just said, wow, this is an amazing resource. I worked out there almost every day doing research. And I think probably the first thing that I really came in contact was the zebra mussel invasion, and understanding, invasive species and how impactful they are on the, or destructive in this case, on the ecosystem. And my family has always been very conscious that way, and I started to think about, you know other things that were, potentially harmful to the environment, and really how beautiful it is and how many resources we do have. And that just kind of, one thing led to another, and then I started actually, you know thinking about it more, how, conservation, how important conservation is to protect against this. And then um as climate change became more of a topic, or an issue, and we were starting to see real world examples of that, I realized, wow, we are, to protect this beauty and these amazing species and this amazing habitat, we really need to start thinking about this. So it just kind of was this evolution. And that's all I can say. I mean, it's just being aware of what was going on. And a lot of it also coming from you know, the background, the biological background that I have, really sparked that.
Thank you so much, both of you, for answering that about your personal experience. So we only have 3 minutes, but I wonder, Joshua, do you think we could go over a few minutes? Because I want to open it up to questions, since there's so much interest here and so many participants.
Yeah, if that works for our speakers, if you have a few extra minutes, we can. And for those who have to hop off, we'll be recording this session, as I mentioned earlier. So we'll send the recording around, and we can also try to answer some of the questions after. We'll send those around as responses.
If you have to leave, put your questions in the chat, and we'll circle back to you. So now, please, everyone who's participating, feel free to ask your questions. You can raise your hand virtually or just raise your hand visually, and we will call on you.
And Paige, do you mind if we start with a couple in the chat, since we have those?
Sure.
So I know there's a lot of questions related to solar development in rural communities and on farms. We could talk all day about this, so I'm just curious, Colleen, if Ancram has rules in place, or how Ancram sort of approaches this, just sort of generally, might be helpful for folks to know.
Okay. So we are working on tweaking that. Our original zoning law did not allow like community size solar installations, and we're working on revisiting that, because as a part of our updated comprehensive planning process, we found that that was something that was relevant. And as you could see, it was actually incorporated into the plan. So that is something that we are currently working on in our revisions. So before our new and updated zoning law comes out, we recognize that it is important. And but it's also important to preserve our open, farmland, to preserve our farmland. We have forested areas that we would like to preserve as well. So it's kind of a touchy subject at this point. However, we actually have done two fairly successful community solars or solarize programs, which is through NYSERDA in the Clean Energy Communities program. And so that we can connect some of the people, households in our town that want to take advantage of community solar. And like one of the solar farms that is within our low district at Central Hudson in Central Hudson. So we have actually encouraged people to sign up to community solar farms they're not in our town, but we do encourage that and try to help facilitate that.
Colin, go ahead. Oh, I think you're on mute, Colin.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I'm really curious about how small towns afford the resources to not only put in the time to come up with really good comprehensive plans, but also update them, and maybe just really like bulleted ideas of how you pull that off. Because I'm in a town of roughly the same size as Ancram. Thank you.
So as far as our comprehensive plans, I did actually look into this because I wasn't sure about that. And it appears that in both of the two updated plans, the town is actually paid for that, and we work with a planning consultant to do so. However, most of the offshoot plans or open space planning and things like that, we have actually secured grants from the Estuary program. Our ag protection law was done, or protection plan was done through the Department of Ag and Markets farmland protection grant. And so we seek grant funds as much as possible. That being said, it's generally done at a volunteer level. We have an amazing group. And when I say group, I mean it broadly, as in our population. We have a ton of volunteers, people that are willing to volunteer their time to do this. And so that can be a real struggle if you don't have that in your town. Something that we've actually started to think about looking at is actually doing the workforce program, which is through NYSERDA, in which you can help, start to look at maybe younger people that are coming out of college or are still within college, and they want to maybe intern with you and they're interested about climate issues. And the town can be reimbursed up to 90% of their salary. So that can help offset some of the costs. And then you have someone that's kind of dedicated working on that. That's one of the hard things is volunteer burnout. I'll be honest, it can be a bit much. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would say we've attempted to seek grant funding wherever possible to try to take, some of that financial burden off of the town.
Just to mention a couple other possible sources of funding, and Ingrid Heckel put these in the chat. The Hudson River Valley Greenway offers 50-50 matching grants that support comprehensive planning and other types of planning. The Department of State has funds, couple different kinds of grant programs that can support comprehensive planning. And then you have your county might be able to offer some technical assistance with planning, or even in perhaps helping you secure a grant that would allow you to engage in planning. It varies a lot county to county, but it's definitely worth looking into resources in your county government. And then if you're within the region of, say, a regional planning council, that's another good source to look, like the Capital District Regional Planning Commission is one.
And following from Colin's question, how would a resident know what their town has already done? Is that on the website, the town website, or would they ask their clerk? Are those the two ways you would learn?
We do post I think all of our plans are posted on our website. In full transparency, our website really needs to be redone. It's a little bit tough to navigate, but we do have everything online. But certainly reaching out to, say, the planning department, and that usually is on the website. Most towns have the contact information. My contact information is right on our town's Climate Smart website or web page. So, I mean, you certainly can reach out to any of us just to get direction or information. But we heavily use the website to actually get things out there.
That varies a lot town to town. And so checking with your town clerk or the clerk for your planning building office, members of those committees can help you find documents that may not have been posted online, especially depending on the vintage of the document. If it was prepared before there was a town website, it might be sitting in your town hall. And so you need to go kind of physically ask for it.
There's
Great.
also eCode 360, which a lot of the older plans, you can find those there. And I can I think I have the website. I could put it in the chat, and you can find your town and see if there are, plans there. I think most municipalities, many of them, upload to there too, especially older plans that there isn't a digital version of that other than a scanned document.
Great. And Colleen, to your point about burnout, for those who are watching or just interested and care, how would they? You had touched on this, both of you, in your presentations, but who would they join? Like, which committees would they reach out to learn exactly where a town or village or city might be in their planning process, and then to get involved? How would they go about doing that?
That again, that varies probably from town to town. For us, actually our town supervisor really is very responsive, but I know that that's not the case in every municipality. Town clerk, as Christine said, might be a helpful source to do that, to check. And also you can look at if your town has a website, you can probably navigate through there. And most people that are listed, like committee members or anything, you should be able to reach out to them as well. But it really varies from town to town.
Fred, go ahead.
Thank you. Colleen, you showed a timeline for the town of Ancram in terms of sort of different watershed moments. And I noticed that you did attain the Climate Smart Community certification. And I find that, in my experience, to be noteworthy for a small town. And, I'm in the town of Monroe down in Orange County, and we're trying for it as well. Can you tell us how long it took to become Climate Smart certified? And, what do you attribute your success to in terms of reaching that fairly lofty goal?
Okay. So I think we took the pledge in 2016. I believe is when we actually took the pledge for the Climate Smart Community program through the DEC. In 2018, we took the pledge for the Clean Energies Communities, which is a NYSERDA program. And we found that there was a lot of overlap between the two. And actually the NYSERDA program was a little bit easier to navigate at that time. So we kind of focused on doing that. And while doing that, on the clean energy community program, as we did actions, we were able to get grant money through NYSERDA to continue actions. And because there's so much overlap between the two programs, we were actually, although not actively working on the climate smart program through DEC, we were in effect fulfilling a lot of those requirements at that time. We have a great group of really climate oriented and conservation oriented individuals in our town. And so they're always pushing. When we achieved bronze, they were like, okay, let's go for silver. You know, they are very, very motivated. So I think probably the biggest thing for getting people to be motivated is to actually doing a lot of public outreach. You know, climate is a problem, you know, climate issues are a problem, and really getting people stirred up and motivated to do that. But it took years to do the Climate Smart program. It's a very huge document. And that, I would say, reaching out to your regional planning commissions or planning groups, and Cornell has helped us a lot, and the Estuary program, in getting kind of helping direct us, because it can be it's overwhelming, really, to be honest. And we finally did a climate planning tool with Cornell, and that really helped focus us into what we've done, what we need to do. And then it was just a matter of actually saying, oh, wow, we've already done that. We did that 5 years ago, and actually working in the portal and actually uploading the information. So I definitely reach out to your regional planning groups. Cornell, the CCE program, your extension program, may have a climate group, and the Estuary program can really help you with that.
Yeah, can I jump in for a second? It's Matt Kovner from the town of Olive. We just achieved our bronze certification, and it was very difficult. As Colleen said, it is really detail oriented, and we would never have been able to pull it off without the help of the Hudson Valley Regional Council and the Cornell Cooperative Extension. Those guys know exactly what needs to get done. They went through all of the actions that we were trying to get the NYSERDA points for, and helped us find the correct documentation and present it properly. I could never have done it without those guys. So I would say reach out and find one or two people at each place who's up for it and who will guide you through the process.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, we're going to take one more question from the audience and then one more from the chat before we end. So Bruce, please go ahead. I think you might be muted, Bruce.
There we go. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I'm Bruce Barry. I'm with the Shandaken CAC. And I have a question for Christine. Christine, on your maps that you had shown earlier, where the ideal situation was, of course, not to place housing or development in the area, in this watershed area where the stream was. You seem to have clustered houses together in a little closer properties. So, for instance, in our town, we have 3 and 5 acre zoning. We have zoning that's above that. Would you have had to change your zoning law to accommodate putting houses that close together in your community, or was that already in place?
So that was like a hypothetical, not for a particular community. and it didn't have a scale to show what size those lots were. But,
Okay.
you know, it could be in your community that you do need to change, yeah, what's already on the books. And that's, there's a long history, like Ancram, Colleen showed for Ancram, there's a long history of planning, and so it's already existing in many places, most places, existing zoning codes and land use regulations. And so it's really looking at those and seeing where they need to change to allow the kind of development that is more climate adaptive, because there may be rules on the books that don't allow that kind of clustering. Yeah.
I can
Good
also,
question.
I can add to
Yeah.
that as well, because our original zoning was very similar to yours, where it was more rigid as far as the lot sizes. And with the exception of so when we went ahead and when we updated our comprehensive plan and redid our first zoning revision, which was in 2014, we found that there was a need to kind of create the ability for cluster zoning. So we created this thing, it's called a conservation subdivision is what it's called. And so it's particularly appropriate for things like Christine's example, because you've got, you know, you might have one lot and a developer one existing lot, and a developer comes in and they want to, say, put up 5 homes. And so they want 5, you know, so what we have the ability to do is actually in our ag district, which is most of our town, is really considered the agricultural district. Standard lot size is 3.5 acres. However, if you go ahead and you do one of these cluster developments, you can, it's a flexible lot size. So what you can do is you can preserve like 60% of it being open space, using 40% to develop it where it's appropriate. And your lot sizes can be like 0.5 acre. And that, so it is something that we incorporated into our zoning to be able to do that.
Thank you.
And just building off this topic, one of our earlier questions from Jeff Scales was around specific to Ancram, about how does Ancram deal with zoning that might be at odds to affordable housing? And I think that's could be a question for you, Christine, too, in terms of what you've seen in other communities. But just obviously we have a housing crisis in this region, and so I'm curious if you have thoughts on that.
So the town is actively trying to address the affordable housing issue. And one of the things that we're looking at doing at this point is creating like a community land trust, or a community trust of land, so that the town can start to set aside parcels. We're still trying to develop how we're going to do this, because obviously it takes money, and how we're going to go about getting the land, but trying to secure land and figuring out ways to try to entice, you know, entities that would be willing to do that is a big, that's right now where we're at. So we're trying to address it. We're looking into doing something like a land trust or a community land trust that we can actually start to put aside areas for that. So I don't have a great answer because we're kind of working on it, but those are some of the ideas that we have at this point. And we actually have an active committee that's working on it as well in the town that was formed.
Anything to add to that, Christine?
Yeah, so I would say there's some good work being done in the Hudson Valley on affordable housing and strategies. And organizations like Pattern for Progress is developing resources and tools in this area. There's an upcoming session at Mohonk in early November, I think, looking at affordable housing and conservation at the same time. So that might be something to check out. And I think it's sort of the peril of the kind of presentation that I gave today is giving the impression that we need only to more tightly restrict development, and then thinking that that makes development inherently more costly. And that's not necessarily the case. Changing our land use regulations to better protect and preserve the natural systems that are contributing to climate resiliency can be done at the same time as you are finding the ways your zoning code is making it harder for people to build affordable units. So definitely encourage thinking about both things at once. We really need to do two things at once. We need to make sure we can house our population in the Hudson Valley, and we need to do this with attention to living systems. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts to contribute here.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've read in your materials that this sort of planning can actually financially benefit a town. So thank you so much, both of you. This is such a fascinating topic. I'm really excited about it in terms of its potential to empower municipalities and residents to plan around their goals in terms of resilience and climate issues. Thank you so much for your extra time that you've given us today. And thank you to the participants for coming. There's clearly a lot of interest in this. We'll be following up to answer some of the unanswered questions in the chat and to provide resources. And thank you. Yeah, thank you again, everyone. Is there anything else, Joshua?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone and just make a plug for our next morning coffee session, which is entitled Lessons from Beacon, How One Community Organized to Decarbonize Their Buildings. And that's going to be on October 17th, also at 8:30. And I'll drop the link in the chat right now for folks to register if you're interested. But thank you to the speakers, and thank you to everyone for joining us today.